would probably take an average 1-2 grinder playing his A game over an average 25-50 grinder playing his C game any day.
You're listening to the Mindset Advantage podcast. Each week, you'll get to peek inside the greatest minds in the game and discover what makes them successful.
Mental toughness separates those that can't handle the stress.
If you're going to treat it like an amateur, you're probably going to have amateur results.
Here are your hosts, Elliot Rowe and Adrian Talenchik Rousum.
Welcome to this week's Mindset Advantage podcast. This week we're going to do something a little different. Over the last few weeks, you've probably heard me talk about my new Poker Mind Coach Academy. It's a community of ambitious players where we look to give our members the tools they need to reach their full potential in the game. One of the benefits of being a member is a bonus segment from the podcast called Afterthoughts. After we record an episode, we all need to hang out on the line while the recordings sort themselves out. There's always a good conversation during that time, so we decided it's a waste not to record it. Usually these conversations are only available to Academy members, but this week we'll be sharing the afterthoughts from last week's episode with Matt Berkey as a sneak peek into one of the benefits of the Academy membership. For more info on the benefits, just visit pokermindcoachacademy.com. Now enjoy the afterthoughts with Matt Berkey.
Yeah, so Matt, thanks for coming on. A lot of stuff you were covering there. How do you feel about sort of talking through all of those things?
Oh, I love that stuff. None of that is like information that I haven't exhaustively talked about in the past with either friends or whoever will listen.
Yeah, it definitely. I kind of got lost in the moment just listening for, and then I was like, oh shoot, my turn.
Yeah, I have a real problem like rabbit holing where it's like it's tough for me to like stay on a subject without just like delving in so deep that now all of a sudden I've shifted to something else. I could have talked about the ecosystem of poker for a long time as well.
I mean, it's something that I find actually really interesting. I'm seeing like parallels between the industry that I'm in and the way that you were describing, you know, that guys get stuck in this trap of 1-2 and like consistently stuck on the learning curve and not moving forward. So, I mean, I'll be in groups of hypnotherapists. There are a huge number who make very, very little money. They're very, you know, very, very low wages. And they'll be on a new course every weekend trying to learn a new technique, which they think is going to, I don't know. I don't even know what they think it's going to do. But they're stuck in this constant learning process and then just never actually working.
Yeah, so I don't know how comparable like your field would be to like the fitness industry, but I think poker is pretty comparable in the sense that the barrier of entry is relatively low in the sense that it's easy to learn the rules and it's not very expensive to play the lowest stake games. But once you want to get anywhere beyond that, now the barrier of entry is incredibly high, right? So like when you're talking about the knowledge barrier of entry, it's really, really, really high and difficult for a lot of people to even enter the learning curve. So for most, once they poke their way through, and nutrition and fitness is 100% the exact same way because it's a very inexact science, right? It's easy to show up to a gym and identify what all the stations are and like what the exercises are you should do. But then coupling that with knowledge and having a good fundamental understanding of like what the next steps are in order to like continue to learn and progress is really, really, really steep. So when a lot of people break through the barrier of entry to actually begin learning, they feel like they've made it. They feel like they're nearing their ceiling, when in reality, they're actually very much at the floor. And this is something I talk about with Christian a lot because I feel like it's very applicable to him because he busted his ass so hard to get into the learning curve that he never bothered to get his way out. And now, like, when you're not trend setting, when you're not able to speak intelligently about your craft, whether it be fitness or I'm sure mindset, poker, etc., when you're not an authority on what it is that you do for a living, you're trapped in that infinite loop. And eventually the information is going to continue to evolve and you're going to get left behind. And that's so reflective of what's happening in poker.
Yeah, the parallels are just incredible with what I'm seeing in my industry. Yeah, it's quite incredible. And then with you were describing the sort of the lower stakes players there and people believing that as soon as they truly understand the game, thinking that's the that's the ceiling. And that's definitely something I come across a lot when I'm talking to people. And, they'll say, no, I know how to play. I've read all the books.
Right.
And I'll be like, no. You now understand how to play. Like, this isn't advanced. This isn't the end of the journey. And is that something you come across where people will feel they've reached the end of them?
Constantly. We have one guy per academy that just challenges everything because it's not reflective of something they read in a book. And it's just like, that's their first barrier, right? Is understanding. So the old parable or whatever is, an idiot thinks he knows everything once he knows something, but a truly intelligent man realizes that once he knows everything, he truly knows nothing, right? Something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing, but that's the problem, right? Like, these beginners feel like they've accumulated some information and now they're absolutely authorities on the game as a whole. Once they break through that barrier, if they ever break through that barrier, then it dawns on them like, oh my God, I don't know anything, right? So expose someone like that to someone like me, and their initial defense is to just challenge everything, because if I'm right and they're wrong, they're fucked, right? Because
yeah,
it's over. It's over because everything that they believe to be reality up until that point has now just been crumbled around them, and they're forced to start all the way back at the beginning, understanding oh God, it's going to be such an uphill climb to get from where I'm at to where he's at.
Do you think that as long as people come to you with an open mind and that base foundation of poker, do you think that you can work with them, or is there some set that's just subset that is just going to be impossible to get out of that loop?
Open-mindedness is wholeheartedly the only prereq that I care about. I don't even care if people don't know about poker. Teaching mechanics is so simple. It's rudimentary, right? You can give them a book or whatever and then just keep having them pound it out and learn it. But it's difficult to present contrarian thought to people who don't naturally gravitate towards that type of stuff. And it requires a lot of open-mindedness to at least say, I'm willing to listen even if I don't agree. So what I find is the abstract thinkers are the easiest ones to really work with. They're very creative. They're out of the box. Nick Howard has been one of my favorite people that I've met over the last year, because he's just he's like me. He's just out there and he's always thinking bigger and broader than what the general scope is. And when you deal a lot in this game with linear thinkers, you have a lot of engineer backgrounds, a lot of scientist type backgrounds and whatnot. They're just so A to B and black and white that it's very difficult to break down those walls and get them to kind of see the world in a 360 point of view rather than just having tunnel vision on the goal at hand.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Nick, because I agree. I think the way that he's thinking about the game it's very close to your thoughts, and it seems from a third party perspective to be where the next growth is. This idea that the game isn't solved. Right. there is more to come, and I think there's a bit of an issue in parts of the industry where people are saying that's it, game over. X, Y, Z. There's nothing else left.
Well, that's kind of the beauty, right? Is that if they're right, then we're all screwed and the game's just going to end, and it is what it is. If we're right, then they're screwed. And we're way ahead of the game, because if we're right, it means this game is in its absolute infancy, and it's the equivalent of space travel in the 60s, right? Our scope was our local solar system, and now fast forward 50, 60, 70 years, whatever, we now understand that there's an infinite universe out there. And it's if we begin to understand poker in that facet, if that ultimately ends up being what's true, where it turns out that we just understand a speck of the game tree, then guys like Nick and myself are going to be very fruitful for the next 40 years of our lives, just continually blazing trails, where everybody else is going to be playing massive catch up on this tiny little niche corner of the market that they thought they solved.
Yeah, and it's exciting to watch, to be honest.
I think I'm definitely...
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm definitely banking on you being right.
Yeah, you would think more people would want to be, but there are just so many nihilists out there who are indifferent to it all and just love the idea of AI and the singularity and things like that.
But I think there are a lot of people in poker, it is a scientific mindset a lot of the time, and there's some there's a neatness to a solution.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? It would fit in with their worldview of other things. So if there is a solution, that's very comforting for a lot of the people who like the game.
Right, and the irony is, and not to turn this into a religious thing, because though I do believe in a God, I don't necessarily believe in organized religion. But the irony is that like almost all of them are atheists and completely comfortable in believing that it's nothingness, not something undefined afterwards, right? So it's always gravitating towards that finite definition.
Terminalistic.
And in some ways we're like designed for that, right? Like we want to achieve solutions, and that's almost like what predicates self-sabotage. Like I've talked about this a lot with you, Elliot, where there were a lot of times throughout my career where I would be on a downswing from 50K to 20K, and now it was like a race to zero, because zero was much closer and more obtainable than getting back to 50,000.
And in a way more comfortable as well, because it's easier, isn't it?
There's no pressure once you're there. It's like you don't have to worry about maintaining anything any longer.
Yeah, as I say, it's so interesting to see how the sort of psychology of it plays out, even within the strategy, which you would think there should be no psychology in the strategy of the game, really. But it still does just show itself in terms of personality types and the way that people go to solve it.
Yeah, and I think that that's like the biggest ignored aspect of it, because it's just convenient to forget about. But if this game does get solved by AI in the near future, well, they're going to have to start back from scratch at solving human psychology. And to my knowledge, like there's nothing moving in the direction of being able to. Just being able to say like, oh, well, all human beings are like this top to bottom.
Yeah, it's as I say, I think there are some issues with the online game, and the sort of the AI and the way that it can impact online.
Yeah.
When it comes to the live game, I mean, from what I'm seeing, it seems to be almost more profitable every year for players.
For the best ones, for sure. The gap between like the elite, the great, the good, and the average, it wasn't that big of a jump from either, right? It was you could kind of relate it to the 80s American economy, where there was just a bolstering middle class. And a lot of that was just based upon the fact that there weren't really strategies, and great players or elite players were just kind of like naturally slightly better than something, similar to like elite athletes, right? They get a head start in the game tree where they don't have to worry about these trivial decisions because they just naturally do them well, where other people are like making errors there and losing money. As the game matures, and so do people, and it becomes much more sophisticated, now you're seeing this 1% versus 99%, where like the average to slightly above break-even players aren't that much further ahead than the people who are like losing slightly to the rake, or even maybe a little bit more. And what you're just left with are elite and fish.
Okay, so it's just and I'll be honest, in terms of who I speak to, it's very likely that I'm speaking to elite players 99% of the time. So I'm only seeing such a very small part of the pool.
Absolutely true, for sure.
You mentioned the pro athletes, and I'm a big baseball fan, and we play a lot of baseball in my family. My son is almost 3, and he loves to swing the bat anyway. But how do you think baseball and your career in baseball prepared you for poker?
Kind of like as I alluded to before, I mean, just failing at such epic levels really programs you to understand where your triggers are. And like I started working with a sports psychologist when I was in college pitching. It's just such a cerebral game, and it becomes so difficult to really comprehend variance and be objective in measuring whether you're talented or you got lucky. Are you lacking talent, or are you getting unlucky? Like that just really weighs on you, especially as like a 19 to 22-year-old who's trying to make a career out of this. So kind of getting that strong foundation and then being able to translate it into a card game where, massive amounts of money are exchanging hand on the turn of a card, it starts that whole like mind game on you all over again. And it really forces like a self-actualizing process, which I think like getting fast-tracked into that point, which just naturally moves you ahead on like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and like you're much more goal-oriented towards enlightenment than you are just survival. Being that far ahead of the game, I think just like gives you a massive edge in a field that's largely going to eat people alive.
Elliot, we'll have to put a link to Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah, we'll have to add that on the podcast page. You're educating everyone, Matt.
That was a big part of my research when I was doing for that talk. I didn't have much of a psychological background, but I knew certain things, and when I was researching, that's what I stumbled upon.
Man,
I didn't tell you at the beginning, but Matt, I'm actually an occupational therapist by training too.
Oh, okay, great.
I have a background in that side as well.
I find everything about the human element to be like wildly intriguing, and especially like that we kind of it's a big struggle for me in the sense that we exploit humans to make money in this game. But along the same lines, it's pre-programmed into the game. Everybody signed up for it. So like there's this battle back and forth between being empathetic to them and just having a killer mindset where you want to squish them like a bug.
Take every penny.
I come from a background of fighting. Like, right. You sign up to get in the cage.
Yeah.
That's, the
so you guys are each end of the spectrum.
The deal is done.
Right.
Like you can't, and I see poker as exactly the same thing. Everyone wants to challenge themselves. Everyone wants to be tested. And I'll be honest, if someone's much better than you, to some extent you want to lose and learn that as well.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And I came out and said this on Twitter about a month ago, and I got like a lot of backlash, but a lot of I don't want to say props, but people agreed. Where I just basically tweeted out and said to all the bum hunters and seat selectors and things along those lines, people seeking micro edges, just do yourself a favor and look for a career change because you have one foot out the door. And it wasn't a slight against those guys. Like, do what you have to do to survive. That's totally fine. But just be honest with yourself and understand that if you're that focused on micro edges and that's how you're making a living, it's going to come to an end and rapidly. So please be prepared for it, because I am a sympathetic person. I don't want to see people panhandling that used to be, successful poker players.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting dynamic, isn't it? The idea of searching for the smallest edge, but then also the side of if you're not challenging yourself and you're taking only the easiest options, what does that mean for your long-term career if this is something you're planning to do for 10 years, 20 years, etc.?
And that's basically what I was getting at from a live venue. Like online, I get it. You have to be very selective, and you can be because you're afforded volume. But live, you're not. So like if you're playing 510 plus, there's only a handful of games in the country. And if you want to maintain those stakes and survive, well, then you better figure out a way to make these games thrive themselves. You can't just say like, oh, game's a little tough today. I'm just going to go play something else or not play at all. Because eventually all the games are going to be too tough. And it's going to be because you always tried to get position on the best player in the game, or because you weren't willing to play five-handed with a bunch of other regs. Like when you're not helping to facilitate the thing that you derive your income from, you're going to ultimately be a part of the destruction of your own atmosphere rather than what helps grow it and make it flourish. And that was just what I was alluding to. It's like, let's stop with this being afraid of one another and start challenging each other to either playing better or cannibalize the other regs, right? Like if anybody's going to lose their career, make sure it's the next guy. Don't let it be you.
Yeah, man, great advice for the live players out there. So, and if you're scared of that, go to Matt's next academy.
Absolutely.
I know Vegas wasn't on my horizon this summer, but I don't know.
I tell you, AJ, honestly, it's so good.
One seat remaining for July 27th.
There we go.
Okay. Oh
man. Well, Matt, thank you so much for coming on. Really enjoyed it. And
I appreciate you guys having me.
No worries, and we'll send us all the links and things, and I'll see you this weekend.
Yeah, sounds great. Can't wait.
Okay, man. Cool. I'll catch up with you soon.
Thanks.
All right,
Matt.
thank you guys.
I hope you enjoyed listening to that conversation as much as I did recording it. Some of the best nuggets come out in these post-show conversations, so I'm glad we found a way to make them available. If you'd like to get the afterthoughts from each episode, as well as many more benefits, check out PokerMindCoachAcademy.com for a full rundown. We'll see you next week.
You've been listening to the Mindset Advantage podcast. To get future episodes delivered to you automatically, make sure to subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcasting service. To get any resources mentioned in the episode or to listen to past shows, visit pokermindcoach.com/TMA podcast. Thanks for listening.